Everybody feeling alive? You're looking alive. But we're going to need some energy for this conversation because we're excited to have you here with us and to talk about a topic that's so important. But being present, being mindful about the conversation, I think is really important to honor the gift that you're going to give us through this conversation. So good to see you. It's great to see you. Absolutely. Is this on? Can you guys hear? You want to say? Can you all hear her through the mic? Yes? No? All right, so we'll get that fixed in a second.
Hello. Oh,
there you go.
Much better.
Your voice sounds so much better that way. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so before we jump into obviously what you're here for, this morning when I led the first conversation, I like to start with people's inspiration and their why, right? In terms of what brings you here at this time, this place, this moment in your work. It's personal, it's a connection, but it's something that moves you to actually share this message. So I would love for you to gift us with, in terms of what's carrying you forward in terms of doing the work that you do.
Well, the work that I do has to do with the science of happiness. And often as a psychiatrist, a researcher, and a therapist, people come to my therapy practice and they'll say, Dr. Judith, I just want to be happy. And then I ask, well, do you even understand the science of your happiness? Because many times we chase what makes other people happy, but it doesn't work for us. And it's because we don't even know what's making us unhappy. When you understand the science of your happiness, you're aware of where you're losing your points of joy. But in medicine these days, we don't prioritize joy. We prioritize eradicating illness and disease. But joy is so important, because joy is built into our DNA. We all have the capacity for joy, but many times we forget how to access it. So my work is fun because I do study high functioning depression and major mental health issues, but it's the flip side of that is joy. And in my other lab, we cultivate joy so that people feel happier.
So can I double click on that if I may? Because I think when we hear words in terms like happiness, well-being, joy looks like something different for everyone. So how, and also I feel like there is peer pressure in space like this, like not with what you're doing, but there's this kind of silent peer pressure in terms of if the people around me are happy, they look like they're joyful, what's wrong with me? So you start to judge, the critic comes out in terms of my joy, my light doesn't look like theirs. So there's this pressure. So how do you help people unmystify and take the critic out of trying to find their joy?
Well, I hope everyone did get a handout, but if you didn't, don't worry, you'll get one at the end. I included this handout of something called the biopsychosocial. And this is a model that all medical students have access to. So I wanted to democratize that and make it available so that we can all draw our own biopsychosocials. A biopsychosocial is unique. No two are identical. Just like we all have a fingerprint, all of our fingerprints are unique. No two are identical, right? So a biopsychosocial allows you to understand where you're losing your points of joy. And in the longevity space, we're experiencing this renaissance in medicine. We're seeing people saying, like, don't wait for the cancer to develop. Let's catch it. Let's teach people how to identify the risks. In the cardiac space, we're saying, let's teach people about reducing the risk of heart attacks. We're not saying come back when you have a heart attack. In mental health, we're still saying, let's wait for people to break down. You know, I have a research lab and we use diagnostic criteria. And at the end of the checklist, if you don't meet the criteria, if you've broken down or you're in distress, we say, well, come back when you break down. And I thought that was a broken model. Why are we doing this in mental health? We need to catch up with all other spaces. So let's give people the tools so they understand the science of what's making them unhappy. And a biopsychosocial is really, really key in understanding where you're losing points of joy. So imagine a Venn diagram. Biologically, what are your risk factors? What medical conditions do you have? Personally, I have a thyroid condition, so if my thyroid isn't in check, I don't feel great. Other people may have autoimmune conditions, so if certain markers are high, you don't feel great. Psychologically, what's happening? Do you have unprocessed past trauma? Do you have attachment styles that are unhealthy? Do you have coping mechanisms that are not the most adaptive? And then socially, what's happening in your day-to-day? Is your workplace supportive or not? Are your relationships healthy or not? Are your habits, like the amount that you move, what you eat, whether or not you're smoking? All of these things play a role. So biopsychosocial factors are really important. But many times we're not even aware of this. So where are you losing your points of joy? And when you look at the biopsychosocial, if you're someone who's got heavy medical issues, well, that's going to be where you're going to focus your efforts. But if you look at the social aspect, if you're in unhealthy relationships, you can eat all the kale you want. That person's still there, right? So you see how it really helps you to recognize and acknowledge how unique you are, because there's only one you. There will only ever be one you. So take the time to understand the science of your unique happiness. Where are you losing these points of joy so that you can strategically add them back?
And people need a reminder. Like you said something so simple, but I don't want to skip over it. Take the time that you need. I think when we're getting up and we're moving through the day, we are all robotic. So it's a privilege and sometimes feels like a luxury to think of ourselves. But what you're reminding us of is it's a requirement, it's necessary, and that's a practice in itself, right? So I want you to help ground us here. What's the difference between burnout and high functioning depression? Because it's a very important distinction, so please take us on that explanation.
Well, Nikki, do you have the brain? I usually have a brain prop where I hold this brain, and I hold the brain in the workplace versus outside of the workplace. So imagine this is your brain in the workplace. In the workplace, burnout by definition is a workplace phenomenon. So pressure and stress on the brain leads to the symptoms. When the person's removed from the workplace, the pressure, the stress isn't there, they get better over time. With high functioning depression in the research study that I did, what happens is that even when the person's in the workplace, you see the symptoms, but when you remove them out, the symptoms aren't getting better. Why? There's something internal. It's not the system, it's something internal that's not resolved. We found a high correlation between folks who, instead of breaking down, they have symptoms of depression, but they keep moving, they keep doing. We found a correlation between trauma and high functioning depression. So their way of coping with their pain is to busy themselves. So out of the workplace, they're taking on someone else's problem. They're cleaning out their garage. They're taking on a side hustle. They can't sit still, right? When they sit still, they feel empty. When they're not busy, they feel restless. So there's something internal that's unresolved. Versus with burnout, it's the workplace. It's the external. And the interesting thing is joy and happiness is the same, right? Happiness is dependent on the external, and it's an event, right? It's an idea. I will be happy when I get that job. I will be happy when I meet my soulmate. I'll be happy when I have a family. All of these things have to happen, right? Whereas joy can be cultivated from within. And in my research lab, when we study joy and we add up the points to see if someone's becoming happier, things that we measure are things like, when you ate your food, was it yummy? Did you go, right? When you took a nap, did you feel refreshed when you woke up? When you were lonely and you reached out to a friend, did you feel seen and heard or connected? Those are all the points. When you were stressed, were you able to self-soothe? Because I don't know one stressed person who's also joyful, right? So all of these are points of joy that are really important, and we add those up to measure happiness. But in our society, we think happiness is, this picture of this perfect family with a house and a car. But even when you get those things, you're still not happy because you're delaying happiness for something to happen, and you're missing out on the experience of joy. And it sounds so basic, right? But I've traveled the world, and I've seen across the globe people who have nothing, but they're still joyful. When you go to see these gurus out in the mountains, they have a mat, bread, and water, but they are joyful. And I'm like, well, what is it about that? They have invested in inner peace, right? It's hard to be joyful when you're stressed. So my work is really on helping you to utilize what's already in your DNA that you've just forgotten how to access. How do you tap into slowing down, acknowledging the fact that you're a human being, not a human doing?
Thank you. You reminded me of a moment when you talk about joy. I'm going to rephrase what you said, but for me, being present with micro joy, like finding those moments and understanding, like, am I getting, those flashes and moments of joy and happiness? And I think about when I first met my grandmother. My parents came here from Africa. They left everything behind, their family, so they were the only ones here. So I didn't grow up with any close family here. So when I was gifted a trip to Africa by friends, it was a surprise. I didn't know. And they said, your only job is to go sing to your grandmothers. And so my grandmother was 108, and my other grandmother was 88. And the first thing that she did was to sing to me with her rosary in her hands. And I thought to myself, for all how tough it is in Nigeria where she was and everything, she was nothing but joyful and light, and my other grandmother the same. And so when I walked across the country, I saw all kinds of different things, etc. But what hit me so profoundly was the amount of joy I saw in struggle. It was still there in spite of. So there was a 50-50, a yes and. It wasn't an either or. So that's what you remind me of. I'm sure everybody in the audience have your moments of what that looks like and feels like for you. But I thank you for taking me back to a memory where it was joyful in the balance of what the 50-50 is and what it looks like.
I love that story, and it's interesting because many times when I go to the different spaces and different countries, some people, they're like, oh, it's mental health. Oh, that's not for me, right? But other people tune in. I always say that mental health is ours. Every single culture has an element of mental health, They just call it something else. I'm from the Caribbean and from Trinidad. And, when I look at the different foods that we eat in the Caribbean, they're spicy. A lot of those spices decrease inflammation. And we're studying them in Western medicine now, and we're like, oh, this is actually really good. An inflamed brain is not a happy brain, but we're already using some of the pepper, the pepper sauce. And, some of the dances that we do in the Caribbean, a lot of that bilateral stimulation, that bilateral movement, our left brain is talking to the right brain. It feels so good. Well, it feels good because your left brain is talking to the right brain. And there's research happening not too far from here looking at the brain's two hemispheres working together, right? There are all these elements woven throughout the world, but we just don't call it mental health. You talk to a guru and they're saying, leave the ego. Well, that's another fancy way of saying don't be a narcissist, right? So there's elements throughout all of our cultures, right? And we all approach it differently. Honor the fact that each and every one of you has mental health. You may not have a mental health condition, but in the same way that you have physical health, you also have mental health. You choose to acknowledge it or you choose to ignore it. But supporting your mental health will lead to better careers, better physical health, better relationships, and people are more invested in their communities. They create positive change in the world, right? So we should all support our mental health.
Thank you. So help me understand, because when I was preparing for the conversation, I learned a term that I can't wait to understand what it means. What is anhedonia? Did I say it right?
Yes, you did.
Thank God.
Some people like to be fancy with it and they say anhedonia, right? But I'm from Jersey, so I say anhedonia, Well, anhedonia literally means a lack of joy and pleasure. It is a scientific term that has existed for over 150 years, but most people have never heard of it. And many people have experienced it. It's that meh, blah, things that used to excite you, they just don't do it anymore. And, it's interesting. People say, well, isn't that just life? No, we're supposed to derive pleasure and joy from life. So when you're lacking joy and pleasure, it's a problem. Some of us, we are very productive and we love what we do and we're getting joy, but others of us, we're just on this treadmill and we just don't even know what we're doing, but we just can't sit still and we lack joy. So anhedonia is a very scientific way of saying you're lacking joy and pleasure. And what's interesting is that most people don't even know, to meet criteria for depression, you don't have to be sad. Anhedonia is enough. You can either be sad or anhedonic, but most people have never heard of it.
Yeah.
And anhedonia is something many have experienced.
I love, because you're taking us to the next question. What are the early signs of high functioning depression? What are the signs? What's easy to miss? And what I love about what you just said, to just put in context, and I don't know if people feel this, but there's sometimes when you start to focus on this space, well-being, and what does it mean to go, sometimes there's this term that we all know of being in flow. And I'd love for you to also tap on the danger of confusing flow and the go, 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 and the being on, like you said, people loving their work. I'm one of those, like, I just love everything. I'm like, if you get me in my zone, I'm all in, but you gotta remember when to slow down before going fast. So as you talk about what the signs are, I just call that out for people because I think it's easy to trick ourselves. You're like, this is my jam. Like, I'm in the zone, I'm working. But could it be, like, what are we not paying attention to mistake, like, your joy is like pseudo joy functioning as something else? So I said a lot, but I know you're gonna take us where we need to go.
Well, I love that you brought up flow. I didn't know you were going to ask that. Interesting story, just a side note. When I was a fellow at NYU, I taught this, they asked me to film all the grand round speakers, and I didn't know what I was doing. And these videos are unfortunately still on YouTube. But my first interview happened to be one of the most famous psychologists in the world, and I had no idea who he was. And I butchered his name because my Trinidadian accent. And I probably will butcher it now, but his name is Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, and he is the father of flow.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
So I got a lesson on flow from the father of flow.
That's great.
And this psychologist, he studies how if you are in the zone, usually your skill matches the challenge, and you're learning and you're thriving, you're enjoying it. So if your skills are higher than the challenge, you're bored. If your skills are lower than the challenge, you're frustrated and stressed out and you get sad, right? So when you're in the zone and you're enjoying things, you're not having anhedonia. Yeah. But when you're just on the treadmill and you're just doing, right? You're the human doing, not the human being. You're just feeling empty. You don't even know why you're doing it anymore. You've lost that joy. And that's the difference. So if you're like killing it and crushing it and you're like, you get joy out of it, you're good. But if you're not enjoying it and you're just feeling kind of empty, that's a problem. But there are clinical symptoms of depression, right? And symptoms of depression include poor concentration, changes in your sleep, changes in your appetite, feeling guilty, hopeless, something called psychomotor agitation, which is a terrible term. We have these terrible terms in medicine that no one can relate to.
Always a mouthful.
It's like a restlessness or a slowing, psychomotor retardation. And sometimes, the hopelessness does become very severe and serious. And in my line of work, I've unfortunately spoken with families who've seen like the person who's pathologically productive on the outside, had it all together, but then they were in crisis and we lost them to depression, right? So, people can become hopeless even though they're functioning, right? So it's important to know the different phases of struggle because, like I said, it could be the mom taking her kid to school every day and showing up for everyone else but herself. It could be the entrepreneur who doesn't want to slow down. They don't ever want to let their team down, but they're letting themselves down. So we really have to prioritize our mental health.
So can I go off script for one question before we go to the last one? But I think it's timely relevant because I was participating in New York Tech Week and I had read an article before I started running around in my flow, going to meetings. And I'm sure you're all seeing it in the headlines in terms of more people going to ChatGPT to actually say, I see the heads nodding already, right? Having those conversations and using that as a channel to kind of like get, I don't want to say therapy, but you know where I'm going with this. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Obviously, I want us to end on a high note, but what are your thoughts? I worry because connecting with people is important. Having a network, and I know not everybody has the luxury of that. So I know what I'm saying is privilege for some, but I worry about just those who are going to the computer who have depression or whatever, right? They still need an outlet on other channels. So what are your thoughts bringing AI to the mix to what you're talking about, if you don't mind?
This is a very complex question. Yeah. I was just at the United Nations on Monday for the World Eating Disorders Summit, and I chatted with my friend, Dr. Tia Knoll, who runs the Lifeline, the suicide text line, right? Really important work. And it's interesting because she said something that was so profound. She said, when we transitioned from phone calls to text messages, it just skyrocketed. And I was like shocked, because I would think that if I were in crisis, I'd want to talk to someone. But the younger generation, they're more comfortable with texting. So there's a real generational divide here. You know, older generations would prefer to talk to someone and know that there's a human there, but the younger generations, I mean, it's already too late to pull that back.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we have to really think about this and not, be too judgmental.
Sure, absolutely.
We have to embrace the fact that younger brains think differently, that these are different times, that maybe the technology moved faster than we were prepared for.
Sure.
And, I think we do need to work with younger people as we're building out these platforms so that we don't lose anything. But they are seeking more help from tech than from others. The great news is that alongside with, the research with regards to young people in crisis is that they do still reach out to their peers. So it's not like they're excluding their peers, but when they're in crisis, they're more comfortable using devices. And so, there's still room for us to learn and grow. Tech is not going anywhere, but I do think we need to partner with the people who are actually using it in real time.
And technology, transformation, all this stuff, it's really about the yes and, right? It's the both and, right? It's not about the either or, and that's we're gonna have to figure it out. And I think there's beauty in that, coming together, figuring out the tools for those who have children, and just making sure that you understand, having conversations, learning, and just being okay to say, here's what I know, here's what we don't know, but figure out. And like you say, there's still a human element of working through it, but we're not judging anyone for actually leaning on those tools, right? The next question, what are the most effective and evidence-based interventions for anxiety and burnout?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of times people think, it has to be outside of work. There are actually really helpful tools you could do at your desk. Last year, I gave a talk to the executive office of the President of the United States team and taught them how to practice workplace wellness at their desks. So things like keeping plants, in your environment, because a reminder of nature is really effective. Many of us live in cities, so we don't get as much nature as we'd hope, but those little things can really help us in our current environments. Thinking about your senses, think about where you're sitting and how you're sitting. If your chair is hard, you're exposing your body to that all day long. So invest in comfortable chairs. It's very tiny interventions. Keeping something called a transitional object in your office. In psychiatry, when someone enters the hospital, and we know they're going to stay for a long time, we ask them to bring little momentums with them. So that could be a picture of your family. It could be something that reminds you of a positive time. Having scents in the office, aromatherapy, all of these things that engage your senses are really helpful. Taking breaks from technology. There's a whole center at Stanford dedicated to Zoom fatigue. It's unnatural for us to see our faces all the time. Yes. If I saw my face next to you right now, I'd be like, is my hair okay? Do I need to fix something? Because we're not supposed to see our faces all the time. So when we're on these Zoom meetings or on these phones and we're seeing our faces all the time, it's just not natural, right? So, and getting standing desks, all of these things allow our brains to release happy chemicals in different ways. But when we're not mindful and intentional about it, then we just do what everyone else is doing, and we're missing out on our points of joy, and we're leaving them on the table.
That's right. Well, my mantra for talks like this is always end up on a high note, because this has been a high, but I want us to go higher in celebrating the magic that you're bringing to your work. So you recently had work peer-reviewed, and it's got an amazing stat that I want you to share with, but you also found out some interesting lessons in the work that you did as part of your paper that was peer-reviewed. So congratulations on your brilliance. But can you talk to the audience a little bit about what your latest accomplishment?
Yeah, so I published the first peer-reviewed study in high-functioning depression, and I found a correlation between trauma and high-functioning depression. And it was my theory that people busy themselves to avoid dealing with their pain, right? That's their coping. the diagnostic criteria for depression has been the same for years, but this is a different world we're living in. You know, many of us can't afford to break down. You know, many times, what we're learning in the literature is that women are twice as likely to have anxiety and depression. We're learning that certain groups are more vulnerable, like BIPOC groups. You know, it's Pride Month. You know, we have to really, as a community, help our fellow man and woman, or human, actually, right? We need to stick together. And so all of these things, and acknowledging that we all, you know, we need to feel seen and heard, we all matter. And people who are joyful invest in the community. They make the world a better place. So invest in your joy, because it really does bleed out to your family, your community, and your organizations.
Excellent. And congratulations on your book. So can we hold up your book just so people know if they want to learn more? So a little prop here, a very important prop, but you're getting ready to go out into the world to promote your book and everything else. And I think it's really important, right? Because what you shared with us, the message that you're telling and what you're sharing, it's so poignant right now as we're just all wanting to just be the best of ourselves, but it's hard. Being yourself is hard work, right? Because you're like, well, am I doing it all right? Do I feel good? But like, if we all woke up today, I think that's a slam dunk. So I start my day saying, okay, I had the benefit and the privilege of being able to wake up. So what am I going to do with my day? It's not always pretty, but you know, to your point, like trying to find ways for us to find that joy, if it's flow when we're in it, or tuning in if something feels off, what have you. It's all work, but you've given us tools, you've given us language, you shared your story, your inspo, you're doing more. So on behalf of the group and the Worth team, we are grateful for you, for what you've brought to us today. And we wish you, honestly, the best of luck as you continue to put more of your work out into the world.
Thank you. I appreciate you. You know, my point of joy is connection. So whenever I go somewhere, I make it a point to connect with someone. And, you know, it could be something else for someone else in here. You know, figure out what that is and try to get 1 point a day.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you. You guys are stuck with me, but thank you, Judith. Appreciate it.